Thanks, Christy. Hi, everybody. I am so glad to see so many familiar names, and I see Bonnie, so familiar face. Hi. So anyway, so there is some snow in Albany, huh? Okay, sorry, I'm easily distracted. So anyway, there are a lot of familiar names on the list today, and that's great. And I am happy to talk about this subject because this is near and dear to my heart in a couple of different ways. Those of you that know me know that I come from an education background. I'm actually, my first career, I was a New York State teacher. I'm K through 6 certified, although I've let my certification expire, but I'm a K through 6 teacher originally. And so when I transitioned into IT, I started my IT career aimed primarily at the education market, especially the K-12 market. So, you know, K-12 is just like libraries. They expect you to do more and more and more every year, but they don't give you more money to do that with. And so one of the things that I was challenged with early in my IT career is how to do amazing things with practically nothing. And so that kind of pushed me into doing a lot of work with the software that we're talking about today. And I'll talk about my criteria for what's on this list in just a minute. You know, that's part of where I started. And then when I came to the Northern New York Library Network, we had this big project, and probably the project I know most of you folks from, but we have the New York State Historic Newspaper Project with 11.5 million pages. It's a big project. The other project I ended up being involved with is New York Heritage. And I know there's a lot of you on the call that are from the New York Heritage realm of the universe as well. And so when working on both of these projects, we needed to be able to do amazing things, again, on a very limited budget. And so that's kind of how I got started on being in this little category of item. So the stuff that you're going to see today, don't worry about taking extensive notes. I have created a web page on our website, and I'll share the URL with you towards the end of the presentation, not up front. See, education person. So what I'm going to do is just walk you through and show you some of the more interesting things that we use here at the network fairly regularly. Okay, so to be included on my list of things that I think are awesome in the digitization software on a budget, it had to be free, as in I didn't pay anything for it, open source, and I'll talk about why that's different than free in just a sec, or it had to be less than $100 in a one-time payment, not a subscription service, not a thing where I have to pay every 2 versions. These things have to be functionally buy once and forget about it as much as possible. So let's talk about the difference between free and open source. A piece of software can be free, but not necessarily open source. But most open source things are free. So free just means that they're offering it to people for very little cost, upfront cost. So it's just a piece of software that you can use, whether it be in your own or whether it be, you know, as be an education license of some form along those lines. So that's the criteria for that. Open source, on the other hand, the program itself, they put the source code of that thing out there so you can make changes to it if you are so inclined. 9 times out of 10, it's free as well, meaning that they put the code out there and you can just use it. Not always the case, but that's the thing. So that's the criteria I used. It had to be free or open source or cheap or frugal. I don't know. Cheap is the phrase I'm going to use on this one, meaning less than $100. So let's talk about the process. I'm going to start right at the very beginning. We're not going to talk about specifics, scanners and that type of thing, but you usually start your digitization process with scanning. In our experience, we have 2 ancient, they're 10+ year old Epson big scanners. They're wide format, they're CDA style scanners. They're beautiful scanners, but like I said, they're 10 years old. The software hasn't been updated in forever. They aren't officially supported by the company that supports them, that created them anymore. So it's one of those things where the software is just in bad shape, and we needed to have an alternative to be able to scan with them because we couldn't use the software provided anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and hopefully share my screen. We had a couple of issues sharing screens ahead of the call. So what I'm going to be doing is kind of jumping back and forth as much as I can. So forgive me for just a moment while I flip-flop. Hopefully, if all went well, you should be able to see view scan. Yay, Chrissy's giving me the thumbs up. So my recommendation for scanning software is this guy right here. This is View Scan from Hamrick Software. This baby cost me $40. $40 gives you the ability to use it on as many computers in your organization as you wish, under like 20. I think if you go above 20, you have to pay like real money for it. The beautiful part about this software package is that this guy right here has 6,000 scanners supported. Almost everything from the early dawn of time onwards. It's a little weird about specialty scanners. So if you have a particular funny format scanner, it may or may not work. You have to play with it. But like for our old Epsons, boom, just started working immediately. So what's gorgeous about this one is that it has what I would consider the beginner model, the training wheel model settings, where you can just go ahead and click scan and you're good to go. But for us that have been doing this for a while, there's the professional settings. And we swap over to the professional settings. This gives you a huge boat ton of options that you get to play with. My favorites on this list is the fact that you can, from here, decide the color depth. Really, if you're doing archival scanning, you should be scanning at 24-bit or above, right? So that's one of your options here. Your scan resolutions. Now, I don't have this hooked up to an actual scanner, so it just gives me a default list of DPI levels. But if you're plugged into an actual scanner, it will give you all the DPI levels that the scanner is capable of doing. The beautiful part about that is that you have a scanner that can do, 600, 1200, 2400 DPI. Those options will show up here and you can just select them off the list and boom, you're in. It also has a whole bunch of image settings involved in that. You can auto rotate and flip, deskew. There's even cropping, so you can auto crop images as well. One of the beautiful things about this piece of software is that if you are like me and lazy as sin, you like to put a bunch of things out on your flatbed scanner and press scan and just have this giant image with bunches of little images in it. By the way, if you are a true archival person, you are screaming at your screen right now and telling me not to do that. And you'd be right. Because if you put multiple things on the scan bed at the same time, the system tries to gauge colors and the color accuracy might not be correct for every image that you put on the flatbed like that. I'm lazy though. Cue the previous conversation about lazy. So if I'm just doing stuff for home, like my wife has an extensive postcard collection, they're not valuable, they're not historically valuable. She just likes them and she likes to scan thumbnails to put in a piece of software where she keeps track of all her fun little postcards. I put them all on the bed at the same time, and then this piece of software will actually pull each of those images out and export them into their own item at the same time. Beautiful thing. This is a great piece of software, totally worth the $40 to cause your 10-year-old scanner, 5-year-old scanner, your cheapy scanner. I have one of those little HP all-in-one, fax a scan a copier things, that are an inkjet. This piece of software works beautifully and makes that scanner that I paid all of $35 for, a really great scanner. And all this cost me was 40 bucks. The beautiful part about this piece of software is it's Windows, it's Mac OS, it's Linux. You can get it across the spectrum. One last thing I want to say about this piece of software too is one of its killer features is that once you get all of these settings fine-tuned to the place that you want them to be, you can actually save the settings into a file and then use it, call it back over and over and over again. So you can tweak it for one project, save it, go on to a different project, come back, use the settings for that project again, and move forward. So this is, yeah, it costs 40 bucks, but it's totally worth, it will revive your poor old dead scanner, I promise. So that is definitely the first one that I wanted to show you today. Let's see if I can get the next thing up. So undoubtedly, when you start talking about free software and people start talking about free image processing software, people start talking about, well, how do I get around Photoshop? I love Photoshop. I was a Photoshop guy for many, many years, once upon a time. The trouble with Photoshop is that it is hyper expensive. It has become more so as the years have worn on because they've moved to a subscription model. So the idea is that you pay $10 a month, I think, or maybe it was $14 a month for the use of the software forevermore, and which ends up being more expensive over a long period of time. So people are always like, well, Chuck, you know open source stuff. What's the alternative? And the alternative that I always suggest is a little piece of software called GIMP. GIMP stands for the Graphics, Imaging, Manipulation, Processing. Okay, new image manipulation program. Geez, I always mess it up. Anyway, the idea behind the GIMP is, and I'll show you the GIMP in just a moment, bring out the GIMP, is it has a horrible name. And I understand it's a horrible name, but you're never going to forget the name because you're always like, oh, it's that name of that software that's slightly offensive, right? Well, there you go. So here is the GIMP. So the GIMP is pretty good as far as features and functions go. It's pretty similar to Photoshop in a lot of ways. It doesn't do some things, and let me expand upon the things it doesn't do. It will do 16-bit color, but that's as high as a color depth as it will do. So if you're manipulating colors or you're color tweaking on photos, especially scanned photos, it's not the world's greatest if you're being very careful about color accuracy. If you're just scanning images with the idea that, oh, I'm going to put these up on New York Heritage, if I'm going to use these on my website, if I'm going to display these to the public, color accuracy becomes a little less important. It's not necessarily archival, but it's good enough for your purposes. So this is GIMP. Let me show you with an example of something that you can do with GIMP. I'm going to open up a file here. I realize you can't see the dialogues I'm pulling up, and that's just fine because then you won't be able to see my dirty desktop. So I am opening right now a collection of the aforementioned postcards that my wife likes to collect. And you should be able to see this in the window in just a moment. Come on, you can do it. All right. Oh, that's why. It has a tendency to pop little windows, and I have two monitors here, so it popped a little window over here asking for more information. So for instance, this is some postcards that I scanned using ViewScan on my cheapy little scanner that I have back at the house. And so let's look at this for a moment. So one of the things you can do, of course, is zoom in on the particular items that you're looking for. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I've already pulled out two of the images out of this set. So I'm going to take this one image here and pull it out so that way we can manipulate it a little later with some of the other pieces of software. So I'm just going to do pretty much a straight up highlight. And because we've got a little bit of a setup, I'm just going to go outside of the edges of the card a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and say, edit, copy. Now you couldn't see that. I apologize. My desktop, for whatever reason, is not displaying. It's just the app. One of the nice features is now that I've copied this, I can go to File, Create, and I can say Create from Clipboard. And so a new image will appear that just has the thing that I copied. I'm not going to rotate this. I'm not going to change this bad boy in any way. I'm just going to leave it just like this and do a File and Export. You can't see this because of the dialogues again, which is really annoying, and I apologize. But we're going to call this Untitled 1. Christy, someday we got to figure out why we can't see the whole desktop. This lacks the impact, let's say. So anyway, I did a copy. I was able to pull out just this image. I still have my original over here in the tab, so that's great. And now that's my derivative image that I pulled a copy out of. This has all the things that you'd expect from a photo editor. You have the ability to manipulate the colors. You have the ability to change the rotate things. You have the ability to copy all of that stuff. This is all pretty straightforward and very Photoshop-like. Now, Photoshop is a professional tool. It does professional level stuff. It's complex. This is GIMP. GIMP is also complex because they're hoping to capture a lot of those same same abilities. But the beautiful part about GIMP is being open source and free. You can just download this thing and work with it. And the internet is literally covered in tutorial videos on how to use this piece of software. They're all over the place. So I highly recommend this as a free alternative to Photoshop. Great. So I am going to stop this bad boy. I've been on Macs so far. In case you've not noticed, I'm a Mac user here. At home, I'm primarily a Linux guy. All of our servers and stuff here in-house are Linux. I am not, generally speaking, a Windows person. However, just for you, I've downloaded and installed Windows on a virtual machine so I can show you some of the cool Windows stuff. So far, what we've talked about was ViewScan, which is available for Windows. I've also shown you now GIMP, which is available for Windows as well. Now I'm going to head off into the weeds here and look at a Windows piece of software that you simply must know about. This is the best, let's say, secret piece of software there is out there going at the moment. So let me see if I can get back to this and we'll show. Ta-da! So this is your, this is a Windows 11 machine. I've honestly never touched Windows 11 before, like yesterday. So this is my first time playing around with Windows 11. But the application I wanted to show you is this guy right here. It's called Urfan View. The beautiful part about Urfan View is this is literally what I would consider the image Swiss Army knife. This application can do a little bit of almost anything. It's uglier than sin. It's what you would consider your standard stereotypical app, Windows app, but it does tons of things. So what I want to show you from this is we're going to go ahead and open an image. Ta-da! Perfect. So I'm just going to open the image that we just were working on in the other application. Come on. There we go. So this is the image that we were just looking at, right? So this is you know, a stereotypical viewer, but there are some beautiful things that Urfan View can do here on this image menu. And we'll go through some of the ones that are here, but the killer feature for me for Urfan View happens to be information. So if you hit information, what you see is this little image properties dialog that pops up. And so what it has on here is everything that you need to know about this particular image, whether it has any compression, its current DPI, its pixel size, its print size, meaning if it takes the DPI and the pixel size and combines them, if you were going to print the image, it tells you what the printed size of that object would be. And here's the part that's important for me, usually, most of the time, is the original colors and the number of unique colors. So here's why it's important for me. A lot of times people send us newspaper pages, and those newspaper pages, they took the time to very carefully scan in full color, which is beautiful and wonderful and great for archival purposes, but we're not an archival site. We are a use display site, access site. And so one of the things I do is I very regularly collapse the number of colors that the images have. And so one of the things I use fairly regularly is this piece of software that allows me to see the number of colors and the, you know, the color depth used. So for instance, it says the original colors 16.7 million, 32 bits per pixel. Okay, our current is below it is the 24 bits per pixel. That tells you how much storage space the file format has allotted for the number, for the pixels that are there. The more colors you include, the larger the file is going to be. And then the number of unique colors is the number of colors, both grays and gradients and color variations for the pixels that are there. So what that means is that I can reduce the size of this file considerably by adjusting the color depth that it's allowed to have, and even the number of colors that are available to it. So I can cut down the number of colors. Well, that's easy to do in this app, because on the image menu, you can go down to our set down here and decrease the color depth. So we can actually reduce the number of colors down as far as we want. The reason 16 is selected is because that's the default, but most of the time I'm pretty close to that. I'll go with 16 colors. Or if I need something in between, I can actually choose the number of colors I want to use. And when I click OK, it'll adjust the colors in the photo. Now, did you see it change? I didn't. We reduced the number of colors because the monitor can't display the full number of colors. And so we reduce the colors in such a way that when it displays on screen, it's going to be easier to see. The other beautiful part of that is it also reduces the file size. Before, we were at 27 some odd megs for the file size, but now that we've decreased the color depth a little bit, the colors, we're down to 6 megs. So it's much easier if you're doing presentation work. Now, obviously, if you're doing archival stuff, you don't want to lose anything. But if you're trying to create versions of your images that are usable for various things, you want to display it on Facebook, for instance, the image probably doesn't need to be 27 megs. They much rather it be what, less than 2, less than 4, something like that. So you can adjust the size of that using this. This piece of software has so many options available to it. It will do crazy things. And there's more crazy things that it can do that we'll talk about in, I guess, in just a couple of minutes. Let's stick in the Windows realm while we're working on this. Tell you what, just as a, proof of concept, remember I did a crop in the last one? Let's do a crop in this one as well, just so you can see. So I'm going to go back to my original image. So here's my original image. Remember in the last app, I pulled out of this one. Let's go ahead and pull this guy out of this one. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go over to edit. And I'm going to say cut area outside of selection. Ta-da. And then I can go File, Save As. Oops. Give me just a second to get to the right folder here, network. I'm going to go into my modded. And let's select TIFF since we were working with TIFFs. And we will call it Untitled version 2. And there we go. So now I just did the same operation I did in GIMP, except I did it in this wonderful little Windows app. So some other things that this Windows app can do. It's all well and good that we're talking about manipulating one image at a time. GIMP is beautiful and wonderful for one image at a time. I love it. Urfan View is, you can do one image at a time. I just did it. It works. It's great. But the real power and the thing that's the best about Urfan View, and there's a lot of them, is it has a batch mode. So say, for instance, you're like us and you're manipulating 1,000 images at the same time, or 50,000 images at the same time, or 100,000 images at the same time. Urfan View has this neat batch processing mode that we use quite a lot. Let's see if I can find where it is on the menu. Usually I just hit the letter B on the keyboard and the dialog appears. So the beautiful part about this batch processing is this allows you to take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images and modify them all at the same time, all to the same level. And it's pretty easy to do. So let's go ahead and do a batch. Since the rest of those images that I had were all the same color depth, except for the one I just saved, let's make them all the same color depth. Easy enough to do. So let's go into folder. And so we've got all of these. I'm going to click Add All. So these now all appear on the list down below. We are going to keep the batch conversion. We're going to keep them as TIFFs. But here's the magic sauce right here. You click on Use Advanced Options for Bulk Resize and Advanced. And a menu appears. And on this menu right here, you can choose to modify almost every aspect of the image. In this case, we are going to change the color depth, and we are going to choose 32. So that's pretty good. I like it right like that. We're going to go over here in this case, because I'm modifying derivative images. I'm not modifying the original one. I'm going to say overwrite existing files. I'm going to say OK. Down here is output file. We're going to do the exact same folder that we were just in. And then we're going to say start batch. And now it will crank through and modify all of those images to that color depth. See, it's replacing them because I told them to replace. And so now that's done. Now, just imagine that when you're doing 50,000 files, it'll take a couple hours to run, but then you're not hand manipulating every single image. Because I can tell you, with 11 million pages, we did not hand manipulate every single image that went to the newspaper site. It's just physically not possible. But tools like this one can do it. The beautiful part about Urfan View is it is free. It's not open source, but it's free. It's only available on Windows. So the question you're asking yourself is, but Chuck, what if I'm on a Mac or a Linux machine and I want to do the same type of thing? Well, I have an answer for you. So let's look at that. The next app on my list is a fun little app called XthenConvert. Give me just a sec here and we'll hook you up with XthenConvert. There it is. So this baby is XthenConvert. XthenConvert I like to think of as being kind of like Urfan View, except on with training wheels. This one is a much easier app to use. It's a little less flexible, meaning if you're looking for a power tool where you can do all sorts of crazy things, Urfan View is your app. However, if you're looking for something a little less crazy complicated, but just as powerful to do batch manipulation, this is the guy to use, okay? So let's go ahead and add some files. I understand you probably can't see the selection dialog, which is fine. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab the 4 files that we just had a minute ago. Like that. I'm looking at these images and I can already see something that you might notice. I bet you that image that I cropped with Urfan View kept all the black space around the file as well. Oops, that's all right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that out of our file list for now, because the rest of these are all similar, meaning they're of the same format for the most part. And you'll see you already get a little bit of information about them. You get to see the width and height, and the color depth. You also see the print size here and the format. But now the beautiful part is you'll notice that there's a set of tabs across the top here. The first tab that you'll see is the input, where we are, but now we can go on to actions. And so what happens is we get on the left-hand screen side of the screen a set of actions that we can slam together, and you'll see what I mean by that in just a second. Over here we have before and after. So before, what it looks like as it sits right now, and then after will be what it looks like when we get done manipulating it. So let's go back over to the actions, and you'll notice when I click on the actions, there's some categories, and there are bunches of options, tons, in fact, changing the colors, changing rotating the images, cropping them, setting DPI levels, good things like that. So let's go ahead and do some of those things right now, so that way we've got some stuff to look at. So let's set the DPI. The DPI, I think, on these images were still set at 600. I'm not sure that that's true. Let's set them to 300 because we don't need them higher than that for what we're doing. So now I've set the DPI, and you'll notice over here when I look at it, it didn't really change because, again, my screen and your screen certainly aren't going to be higher than 300 DPI, generally speaking. I'm also going to add another one where I go ahead and rotate. So I can choose which direction to rotate it. And this always takes me a little bit of time to figure out because, you know, let's see, 90 degrees. Wow, that looks pretty good. So what you can do is you can thumb through the rest of the images, and it will show you the other ones in the set. And you'll see that they all look like they're rotated. So it's beautiful because then you can go ahead and spin through and modify a whole bunch of these. One of the nice things that's on this here too is you'll see there's an EXIF orientation. If you, most of the photos you're working with came from a digital camera, and the digital camera usually records the orientation of the camera as part of the EXIF information. You can actually use the EXIF information to auto-correct a bunch of images in a pass. So say, for instance, I like these. These are fine. They're going to go to 300 DPI. They're rotated. I don't think I'll adjust color or anything because they're a bunch of kind of mismatched images. The next tab over says output. And so now here's what you do. You decide where you're going to put these guys. In this case, you've got different options. You can email them, you can zip them, or FTP. I have never used any of the rest of these options. I've always used a folder. I'm going to pop up a dialog that I know that you can't see. I'm going to select the, oops, I'm going to select the exact same folder that they came out of. Because I'm going to overwrite them, again, I'm not keeping, I'm not modifying the original, I'm just modifying these. I'm just going to go ahead and replace them. We're going to keep the original date and time and attributes. You can preserve any of these things that you want. You'll notice that there's also stuff for multi-page, ability to open a file explorer when you're done, good stuff like that. But then if I'm happy with what I've got, I come over here, I click the convert button, and it will go ahead and pound through them for you and finish them up and give you a set. Honestly, a lot of the time, if I am splitting newspaper pages, like for instance, people will have a tendency to send us images that have both newspapers, the way it would be photographed on a reel of film, I can use this piece of software and just have it crop out and show me one page at a time, and I make a pass all the way through. And then I go back to the original images, and then I make this pass all the way through showing the other page instead. But all that options are right here and are cropping. So we can actually do cropping from here. And it works beautifully. I can do thousands and thousands and thousands of images at a time. So this is XthenConvert. This baby is free. It's not open source, it's free. It's available for Windows and Mac OS and Linux. So it's out there and available. I highly recommend that you give it a shot. It's free for, and I forget now exactly what it was, educational institutions, which I consider libraries to be. And you don't have to show any licensing on that. You just download it and use it and love life on it because it's great. All right, so let's bop back over to Windows for just a minute because I have yet another killer Windows app that you got to see. Let me again get that stupid window to show. Thanks for being patient on the sharing of these screens back and forth. I thought when we started this, I was just going to show my desktop and life was going to be good and wonderful, but apparently Zoom is not cooperating with me today. All right, great. So the other killer app I wanted to show you on Windows, and I'll show you, there is a Mac equivalent to this. There are thousands of Linux ones, is Flash Renamer. We love this piece of software. Let's bring it up. The waiting for something to happen dance. The reason this is so slow is because I'm running Windows on a virtual machine on my Mac, and my poor MacBook Air just simply doesn't have enough horsepower to do it well. It wants to, but it can't. Okay, so this is Flash Renamer. Flash Renamer is one of those apps that we didn't know that we needed when we started working with the newspaper project. What happens all the time is that people will send us boat tons of images that have all sorts of really strange names, and they have to be sequentially numbered, meaning page 1 has to say whatever page 1, whatever page 2, whatever page 3, and you just can't trust a piece of software to necessarily give you exactly the thing you're looking for. So that's, in this case, one of the beautiful things is that we needed to be able to do this. I noticed that I must have saved when we did that last pass through those images as JPEGs instead of TIFFs, which is too bad. But that's fine. For our purposes here, we can go ahead and use these. So what Flash Renamer does is it allows you to take a folder of files and rename them in mass. And this sounds silly, but this is a tool that'll save you tons of hours of going through and manually renaming things. For instance, say I don't want that to be untitled. Say I want it to be something different. Well, what I can do is I can actually click on this little eyeball. It'll bring up one of the files. I can highlight the part of the name I want to change and say select. And you'll see it moved it into this box over here. And you'll see it auto previewed. So I'm doing a replace. And now I've replaced it with nothing. And I'm going to say postcard collection. So now you'll see we have over on this side the original file name. You'll see over here on this side we have the renamed version of that. And if I wanted to, I could just click rename right now and it would rename all of these. But the killer feature for me on this piece of software actually is the presets. So let's go over to the preset window. And you'll notice there's a bunch of presets already here. I like these, but I don't use them very often. What I do is I make my own. So if I go back over here to Preset Manager, and it's got these setups here, I'm going to say a new one, and we're going to call this Postcard Fix. So now I have Postcard Fix right here. I can go back to my replace. So I have my cool replacement the way I want it to be. And I can add it to the Postcard Fix. So now it's in the same folder as the Postcard Fix. That's cool. So now let's go back over to browser and say, for instance, I want to pad these zeros. Okay, pad these with zeros. If I'm alphabetically, computers, when they alphabetically sort with the fewest number of characters. So if I were to put a bunch of files in a folder, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 sorts to the top next to 1. So it's 1, 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you want padded zeros whenever you possibly can. So this is how you do it in this piece of software here. You go over to numbers. There's a 0 padding. And I said 2 digits. And you'll notice it just auto did it on this side. That's super cool. So I'm going to go to my preset manager now. I have my postcard fix down here. And I'm going to go ahead and add this to the list. So what that does now is that it tells the program that it's going to change this name first, then pad that baby with zeros. So I'm going to go back over to presets. I'm going to go to browser. And if I select postcard fix, you'll notice now it does both of those operations to the file name at the same time. So it does the untitled to postcard retitling. And then the second part is it pads the zeros and it does it automatically for me. And then from here, I can just say rename and it does them all. Beautiful, fast. If you take the time to do it and do it well and make sure it does everything that you want when you do that rename, you can do some really crazy complex stuff. I've done renumbering, redating, changing the date in a file name, moving whole sections of files around, changing their order, because you can renumber things and you can reverse renumber things and you can change where the number sequencing starts and where it ends. So you can do all this really crazy stuff to rearrange this. This piece of software costs you 20 bucks. But let me tell you what, you will use it to death like crazy, okay? Like bat crazy. It's nuts. And when you buy the license for this, you can use it on multiple machines. I think there's a limit of up to 5. I've actually paid for 2 licenses for this thing over the years. And we've used it on almost everything because it's a crazy powerful piece of software. I promised that there was a Mac version. Let's go look at the Mac version. It's not Flash Renamer. It's got a slightly less, well, more generic name, I guess. So let me call up that one here. Come on.
Hey, Chuck, can I interrupt you for a sec?
Go right ahead.
That renamer tool last time that you just showed us, is that an annual fee or a one-time fee?
That's a one-time.
And in other news, I did fix the issue, I think, but I doubt it would work for our current program.
Session.
Yes, but next time.
Huh. I apologize because the app I was going to show you next for Mac apparently is not on this machine. Oh,
Do you want me to show it? Is it XthenConvert? Oh, wait.
no.
Renamer?
It'll be on the webpage that I'll send you the link to. It's functionally very much the same idea. You can string various rename operations together and pass them straight through.
Is it
which is a beautiful thing.
Name changer?
It's called Better Rename, and they're on like version 11 or so. It is also a paid application, but it's only $25. Again, a beautiful application designed to kind of do these things at low cost. So those were kind of the big ones I wanted to show you. I'm sure the elephant in the room for a lot of people comes down, someone's going to ask, so what about OCR? Optical character recognition. People want to find cheap or free alternatives all the time to optical character recognition. And unfortunately, the bad news I've got for you is I don't have an easy answer. Typically, the leader in this space ends up being Abby Fine Reader, especially the desktop version. People have a tendency to love that. Abby Fine Reader on Windows has a very different feature set than it does on Mac. Mac users, unfortunately, you're kind of out of luck. The version of Abby Fine Reader available for Mac is awful. It doesn't have anywhere near the same option set as the one available on Windows. Drives me batty. And Abby Fine Reader is expensive. You can find on all platforms various OCR, like low-end OCR programs from anywhere from $50 to free. But typically they don't have quite the same feature set as Abby Fine Reader. One of the ones that actually, I may actually have that one installed on this machine. Or maybe I don't. One of the ones that I've used previously is one from the App Store. It is a, I wish I could remember the name of it off the top of my head. Anyway, there are smaller ones, but generally speaking, the smaller ones that are out there use the Tesseract engine. Google developed and released into open source a few years ago a OCR engine called Tesseract. Tesseract is a command line only application. It is extremely good and it does the job, but it's a command line application. So a lot of these kind of low-end applications that you see that do OCR are actually creating kind of a GUI that sits on top of the Tesseract engine. The Tesseract engine is not one of those things that you can use for fine control. One of the things that Abby Fine Reader does well is it allows you to correct the OCR after you've done the OCR read. So if you have a book, it goes through and it reads the contents of the book, it creates the pages, and then you can go in and edit the OCR before you output it to a text file or output it to a PDF. Most of these Tesseract-based applications don't allow you to do any post-editing. If you don't care about post-editing, they're perfectly fine and work well. One of the things I've done a lot of just recently is I've actually written a Python program to use Tesseract to do conversions. There's a bunch of files I'm about to turn over to Christy to put on New York Heritage that she needed the pages read and then put into text files, in which case I was able to write a Python script that just reads through all the images, pulls it, converts the images into text, puts them in text files. So I wish I had a better recommendation or any recommendation other than Abby Fine Reader. And if anybody has one out there that they're using that they really love, please share that information, because it's something that I'm sure all of us would be truly interested in. I hate paying for Abby Fine Reader. I hate doing it, but I do. We own like 3 or 4 copies of it here. So one of the things I invited you guys to do is that if you had any apps that you use that you think would be worth mentioning on the free, cheap open source end of the spectrum that would be worth sharing, I would love to hear from you. If you want to talk about it now, feel free. If you want to send me an email, and I'll include it in my list. I promised at the very beginning that I would post a link to where I keep a list of these pieces of software with my descriptions. So I've just posted into the chat a link to that. I include in that some things that we didn't talk about for this one. PDF splitting. We do a lot of splitting in-house here, meaning somebody will send us newspapers that are a PDF that are about 16 pages, 32 pages, whatever it happens to be, all contained in a single file. And I don't need it in a single file. So instead, what I use is a PDF splitting app to do that work. Also, I included in there file managers. This sounds silly, and I hate to say it aloud, but it's true. Windows and Mac are awful about copying files. Not around your hard drive, but if you have a share on a server you want to copy files to, Windows takes forever and it isn't very accurate, meaning that it's possible your files will get mangled in the transfer. Mac isn't a lot better. Mac has trouble transferring to older Samba shares, so older Windows shares. It has tons of issues with it. For whatever reason, will drop files, or a file will get stuck and it'll take it 6 or 7 hours to complete. It's crazy stupid. But on the bright side, there are some apps out there that allow you to work around that. Anything that on Windows and Linux machines, there's a great one called Double Commander, which is basically a 2-paned file manager, and you can copy files back and forth using that. It's more accurate because it keeps track of all the files it was able to copy and how it was able to copy it. And it will let you know what files failed to copy and why, which is super important when you're copying files from location to location. It also, Double Commander, this is the one again for Windows, has a plugins infrastructure, so you can actually add features to it. And one of them is a checksum. So you can actually display the checksum of a file. Granted, it only does a file at a time, not whole folders. I wish it would do whole folders. Maybe I'll write a new plugin for it at some point. But the idea being is that you can go, okay, is this file exactly the same as the previous file? That's important for archival purposes. You want to make sure that you haven't any lossy between it. I also have a friend who works in legal documents, and for him too, that's a big deal. If a photo is taken of a crime scene, the photo has to be proven as unaltered between the time that it leaves the camera and the time that it appears in court. And so he uses checksums all the time to do that. And in fact, that's where I got that piece of software from originally, as my friend suggested it. On Mac, there's one called Commander One, same set of features, except for the plugin. It doesn't have the plugin structure. But again, it'll let you know when a copy fails back and forth. So there's some folks have thrown some stuff in the chat, which is awesome. Automator was suggested by Andrew Davis. Absolutely. I've used Automator for a few things. It's good for batch file renames. I am wary of using it for file conversions because it has a tendency to cache the files in a hidden directory unless you tell it not to. I actually filled up a whole hard drive, 1 terabyte hard drive accidentally one time using Automator. But Automator is a great tool. Yeah, reading handwriting is not a thing that there's software out there for right now. I wish there was, because my wife loves to take the text from the note that people hand wrote on the back of those postcards and put it in her software. But that means that she's hand transcribing what people have written. So I don't know of any off the top of my head. Photo comparison software name. We were using Double Commander to compare the checksums. Double Commander. That's on the webpage link that I sent you. Anybody else have any other? By the way, if you find something that's sweet, please send me an email about it, and I will post it to this page. I'll write up a little review and throw it up there, because there is some crazy software I'm sure I've never heard of. This is just the stuff I've run across in the last 8 years of manipulating tons and tons and tons of files. My good notes, good notes. I don't know that one.
It's like a note app, like for like writing on your iPad and whatnot. And so it
cool.
converts your writing to text. But I don't know if like you could import a document. I should try it.
It's in the lines of stuff like Evernote and OneNote, that style of note-taking app. I think Evernote can do handwriting conversion to a limited degree. I don't know. I'm not I used to be an Evernote user back in the day, but I haven't used it in several years. Image Magic. Thank you, Eric. You're absolutely right. Image Magic, for everybody else, Image Magic is another one of those command line-esque tools. There are plenty of interface like GUIs, graphic user interfaces for it now, but we've absolutely used Image Magic. Back when I was writing Bash scripts, Bash is kind of a light programming language for Linux stuff. I used to use Image Magic an awful lot because you could call it from the command line and do some crazy powerful things. Image Magic is really strong at doing conversions and modifications of things. You can actually do white space detection with it, which was one of the things that I was playing with it on doing, is taking an image and actually having it auto crop to the size of the image from a command line tool. Yeah, Image Magic's a great thing if you're willing to put a little bit of work into figuring out the command line options for it. Crazy powerful. A lot of the really cool tools require you to put a little effort into them, whether that be command line or whether that be a programming thing like learning a little bit of Python to make it work. I grew up in the era of when they taught BASIC in schools, the basic programming language in schools. They were like, oh yeah, everybody will need to know how to program someday. And that lasted for about 3 years. And then they stopped teaching programming pretty universally. So I have a tendency to default to command line tools if I can. Anybody else got anything or some questions? I'm open for questions.
Feel free to unmute or chat or however.
Yeah, however you feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, this is Becky Burke. I was just wondering about security measures for any of the apps. You know, something's coming from Bosnia.
Well, you know, I think that is, I think that's one of those things where it's a matter of being careful about where you're getting stuff from. Especially, I feel like what used to be the shareware community, there's this idea that anybody can slap up a piece of software. And it's great if you go to the software of the company that owns it and you download it off of their site. But there's an awful lot of sites out there that are aggregators who, oh, here are 50 alternatives for Photoshop, and they give you a list of links. Not always do those links go back to the people who wrote the software. And that's very true, I feel, of free software. Open source software has a tendency to be better about that because you'll end up at some place like GitHub or SourceForge or one of those sites where the code to the application is there, as well as compiled runnable versions. So it's a really it's a matter of being careful of where you're getting it from. If it looks a little sketchy, it's entirely possible it's going to be sketchy. That being said, there are some apps that I would avoid like the plague. Don't download anything that claims to download files from videos from YouTube. Don't install anything locally on your machine because those have a tendency to be pretty dirty. It's kind of like recipe sites on the internet, you know, they're almost worse than porn for ads. There's some apps that are just like that. I'm trying to think of some other ones that I've done that have been pretty sketchy. But anyway, generally speaking, if you go to some place that's open source or is can be considered open source, they have a tendency to be a little more reputable because they've out there and people have seen them. Closed source stuff that's just free, maybe they're sucking your information and sending it to Russia. Who knows? So that's a really good point. Be careful out there. Oh, and if you're on Windows, for the love of God, run an antivirus. I don't care which one, just run one. Any other questions?
I feel like I should almost share some of the other presentations that you've done, Chuck, so that people
Sure.
catch up on some things. I'll link to that in the follow-up email so everyone can benefit. So,
Right.
but yeah, thank you all for coming. If there's no other questions, I think we can let everyone off the hook for the afternoon. And thank
Thank
you
you
all.
so much, everybody.
Thank you, Chuck, for presenting.
No problem.
Bye.